I was thinking about this as we were talking about this topic. Maybe it's not that television has become more like film. It's more like television has become more like a novelization.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's like they're sort of following some of the rules of TV where it's like, yeah, we want to make sure at the end we do something that makes them want to watch the next episode, like at the end of a chapter of a book.
Right.
Make sure you want to watch the next chapter. But it's more like a serialized novel even than a film.
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of doing, I don't think this is too much of an overstatement, what Charles Dickens did way back with his serialization of his novels, and they would come out in the newspaper, however many times. And I mean, it's been very refreshing, and I think Twin Peaks kind of began that, and then shows like The Sopranos, and a show that doesn't really get a lot of credit for it, but Buffy the Vampire Slayer in the late '90s, Joss Whedon really started to do that kind of serialization of a storyline an arc through an entire season. That was really interesting.
Well, and that's a good point because a lot of those, a lot of shows that I sort of love from that era were sort of arc based. It's like they thought out, okay, what is this character doing, and how do we get him to this point at the end of the season? Well,
it's almost like doing the old sort of serialized like cowboy westerns, like without the narrator, like will he make it? Stay tuned next week. Like it's doing that, but without sort of banging you over the head.
Yeah, without the cliffhanger thing attached to it.
And of course, there are other shows that one show that got me hooked. It took a while, but was Hell on Wheels, which is another AMC show. I don't think it's as good as Deadwood. But there's a lot of really interesting things the show did. And that's what's really interesting about these networks is that they've had so many successes that they are willing to give some of these shows like Hell on Wheels. I did not expect it to last a season because it doesn't really go – you should watch it, but this is not a good thing to say about it. It doesn't really go anywhere in the first season. It sort of takes its time. You do only learn certain things, and it just kind of stops at a certain point. Whereas season 2, it sort of – steamrolls, to use a sort of not direct pun, but and it starts going somewhere, and then things happen, and then I get very upset about things that are happening. But it's just like, okay, well, you earned that. Like, so it's interesting to see that because they had like Rubicon.
Rubicon,
was
that was
like it's just like, what are you trying to do? Thank you for canceling it.
It was a great idea, but it was slow as molasses and just didn't go anywhere. And I know it's funny, these networks too. One thing, if we look past the censorship, that degree of freedom, I think what's interesting about these shows is different degrees of creative freedom. I think has been a big game changer. Like HBO. I mean, this is maybe a little bit of an overstatement, but I think a lot of their shows, if a big name is attached to it, they write a check and say you can pretty much do whatever you want. Whereas AMC, they kind of have an inconsistent, kind of contentious relationship with their showrunners. I know Matthew Weiner of Mad Men and Vince Gilligan, Breaking Bad, can pretty much do whatever they want. Frank Darabont, Walking Dead, he got the axe. And I know they have that kind of almost adversarial relationship with some of those other shows. I can almost feel Walking Dead, sometimes it's really good and sometimes it's really not. And I can feel almost like when the network is giving them notes. And sometimes the notes may not be a bad thing because sometimes that show was really dragging. But so it just but I think that creative freedom helps.
And it makes you wonder if a show works better with a limited season run, like 13 episodes or 22, 23. Like it's just like, can you do more with less?
Well, I can't. I don't know if I've ever seen a 22 to 24 episode season of a show that didn't have at least 5 or 6 filler episodes. Even something like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which had a great sort of sense of here's what we want to accomplish in this season, had lots of filler episodes. They did. Lots of them. Even something, let's go back even a little bit further. How about the X-Files?
Sure, I was going to mention that.
The X-Files, when I go back and watch it now, the episodes that really, really work are the standalone episodes.
The campy ones.
The episodes that are like all about like, oh, what's the mystery with my sister? What happened to her? They are terrible. They do not hold up at all.
They don't.
By the way, best X-Files episode, Bad Blood, written by Vince Gilligan. Vince Gilligan worked on X-Files.
Which one is that?
Bad Blood is the one. It's sort of like a Rashomon perspective. They go to this small town and There's vampires there.
Is it the one where they order the pizza?
Yes.
Oh, that is. Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
I can never remember the name of that episode. It has the kid from the redhead kid.
Yeah, Nickelodeon show. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, you're right.
But it's great because Mulder is like, "Oh, this happened and this happened," and then Scully's like, "That's not what happened."
Yeah. And she tells her side. Yeah.
Oh, it's an amazing episode. Vince Gilligan wrote that, and So. And that's the first thing I remember about Breaking Bad, seeing Vince Gilligan attached. Like, he wrote X-Files episodes.
Yeah, he did play a big part in the X-Files.
Yeah.
Throughout the years.
Yeah. But yeah, what else did I want to talk about here? I had it right in the front of my head, and I totally forget. Anyways.
Well, I think you're right also about the fact that 13 episode seasons also add to that creative freedom as well, where because, I mean, I think I read somewhere like an average episode of an average 22 episode TV show they have for an hour long. They have only like 8 days to shoot it. Whereas Breaking Bad, I think I read they have maybe double that, like maybe 15, 16 days, which for an episode like, I mean, Breaking Bad is the most cinematic show on TV right now. I've seen like the train heist epised last year.
Yeah.
Steven Soderbergh talked about that episode, and he said that episode was amazing. He said because he was talking about his retirement from movies and how he was getting so frustrated going to these studio executives and nobody would know a thing of what he was talking about with the film. And then he went to HBO for the Liberace movie he just did, and they paid the budget and so forth. And he said he's just amazed by how much better pound for pound. Not saying there aren't any bad movies, but it is amazing if you just kind of flip at random how much better on an average episode of a show is.
Oh, and it helps too, I think, to get bigger names for the shorter amount of times. Like if you give them 13 episodes, they can get the big movie stars to come in and do something. I mean, another show that just popped in my head is Damages.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, obviously they've got that relationship with I can't even think of her name.
Glenn Close.
Glenn Close. Of course, she was on The Shield, and that that took that show to was getting a little stale. And then they were like, "Oh, let's bring in Glenn Close," and it was like, "Oh my God, they found somebody that can go against Fig Mackey."
And when your TV show has guts, you can have the confidence to say, "You know what? We're going to bring in Glenn Close for one season. We're going to write her an arc for one season, and she's going to come in and do it." And they had Forrest Whitaker on there for a season as well.
Well, no, it was he. I think kind of bled into another season, but yeah, totally. Yeah. Like these big names for these short amount of times, and then of course she went on to do Damages, which is another good show, and that's on FX. So it's like these actors start forming these relationships with these networks. Yeah. They have these shorter durations of episodes. I think that helps too, to be able to say, okay, we've got 13 episodes. We got this budget. Okay, we've allocated this much, and we've got this much. Let's go find a big name star and pull it in, because Bryan Cranston. Not a huge name.
He was not a huge name at the start of Breaking Bad.
Whereas now
he was the dad from Malcolm in the Middle. That's all I could name him from.
Right.
And now he hasn't headlined his own movie yet, but he's been the second guy, the guy you remember from like 6 or 7 movies, including Argo, which he was really good in.
Yeah,
he's good in Drive,
and I think he's purposely doing that.
Well, he's not a big movie star, and I mean, the stigma is gone now from TV, and in fact, I mean, if you're an actor now, what are the odds you're going to do anything in an average film except compete with a bunch of special effects and say a bunch of bad dialogue, whereas you can go on a TV show, a high-quality show, and play a memorable character. And
be able to sort of nudge it in directions that you want it to go in for the entire run, The other thing I want to talk about was the amount of risk for some of these shows. There's a lot of money being spent on these shows, and if they're not successful, that's a bad day. I mean, think about something like Boardwalk Empire, where they literally rebuilt the Atlantic City Boardwalk as a set. If that show goes one season, that's a disaster. That's a huge disaster. They've got this huge set they can't do anything with. And I almost wonder if, because I think HBO learned their lesson with Rome and Deadwood. They canceled those probably before their time and ended up with a lot of sunk costs for sets and stuff that they could have, amortized out, to use a, boring accounting term, over a few more years to get a little more out of their investment. So I almost wonder if they went if the only reason – I mean, Boardwalk Empire has Steve Buscemi. It had Martin Scorsese attached early on. I don't know if he's still doing anything with it. But it also makes me wonder if they're like, you know what? whatever happens, this is going 4 seasons. We got to make this go at least 4 or 5 seasons, because if we don't, we're wasting a lot of money.
Yeah, and I can't really think of too many shows. I mean, well, Walking Dead, for instance, they built the prison, but you weren't going to see that in season 1. Season 2, that just wasn't going to happen. Of course, show gains popularity. Some people change hands. They're like, well, we kind of need to go this direction. Please allow us the budget to build this. I mean, because they could have done that as a digital set piece, but there are physical parts of that, and it really helps enhance the show.
Yeah.
So obviously that's not a huge it's a decent chunk of set, but nothing like a entire.
Yeah, and I mean it's different when it's period.
Right.
A lot of these shows are doing period stuff. Mad Men, Boardwalk Empire, lots of these shows are sort of The Americans even.
Yeah.
It's set in the mid 80s, which the only possible reason it could be set in the mid 80s is so that it's mid Cold War, height of the Cold War. That's it. It adds something to it. I don't know if it adds a lot to it, but let's talk about The Americans for a second, because now it's in my head. The Americans is a show, and the premise is amazing.
Yeah.
The premise is so good. It's about 2 KGB spies posing as Americans, and they are posing as a married couple. They've lived in America for like 20 years. They've had kids in America. They are Americans for all intents and purposes, but they're actual KGB spies putting out missions. I don't think it's lived up to the premise yet. I'm only about 5 episodes in. I hope that it lives up to that premise, but that's an interesting show. And for the most part, they don't work too hard at making it feel like the 80s. It's like the cars, they're pretty much from the 80s, and the news reports are from the 80s, the TVs are from the 80s, and they don't have cell phones. But other than that...
Yeah. Well, Mad Men, I just started thinking about it. This season, they've started showing exterior locations mostly on the West Coast. I don't think we've ever seen too many East Coast things, and that's typically like movies are like, it's real easy for a movie to be like, okay, this is set in the 1920s because there's the Brooklyn Bridge, it's like, it's pretty easy to do that. But I started thinking about it. I don't think I've ever really seen any exterior stuff on Mad Men that hasn't been like a campsite or, but it's like, and I just thought about a couple episodes, they go to, the West Coast and they spend these times in these hotels and they've clearly mocked them up and gotten like classic cars in the parking lot. But I was like, I wonder if that was like a creative choice. Like, no, we're only going to do set pieces, like actual interior sets in New York. And then when we go to Los Angeles, that's kind of interesting. It makes me want to watch the show even more closely now. Like, why is that? Like, why don't they want to do that? Well, because I know it's shot in L.A., so that probably helps, So it's like they're not going to – well, then again, L.A. has like 4 different versions of New York, so I don't know. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, I don't know. But both Mad Men and The Americans, I think, are good at one thing, which is, at least as far as I can tell, is they've been very consistent with the historical timeline. Historical timeline. I haven't seen too many kind of, what am I trying to say? Eyebrow raisers, inconsistencies. And I mean, Mad Men, I kind of have to take their word for it. But The Americans, I grew up. I lived through that. And the episode where Reagan got shot, it brought back a lot of memories for me, and I thought it hit. I was about 11 years old, I think, when it happened, and boy, it hit the mood because I had forgotten that a lot of people. There was rumors at the time: was this a KGB hit? Was it an assassination? And it being something totally different. But at the time, you just didn't know.
Yeah, and that was interesting because I lived through that, but I was so young that I don't remember anything about that. But it made me think about that, because that was. Between Kennedy and now, that's the only real serious assassination attempt for a sitting president. Although maybe Ford was shot at, I don't know.
He was.
He definitely was.
But that was, and that was something they were talking about in the episode of like, oh, where were you when Kennedy was, and all that stuff. And it was like, that was an interesting sort of look at that moment.
That's what's interesting about Mad Men. Obviously, they made a pretty big deal about JFK getting shot, and then recently in this season, Robert Kennedy gets shot. And it's just like you see these characters dealing with that, like they're having all those JFK emotions coming back, and it's like, oh wow, and it's like they just sort of subtly show the Robert Kennedy but then you see all these characters just sort of like sitting around like. Oh, life sucks. It's like, why are you so? Because I didn't live through that, but then I started thinking, well, obviously their life was their own lives were completely different when JFK, was assassinated compared to now. So maybe that's just, I thought it was a very creative way of doing that. I had another show that I was thinking of, but another show that sort of does that nice thing that Homicide did, to go back to that real quick, is MI5.
Oh, yeah.
That show is really good at sort of not knowing who's sticking around for what reason.
That show almost takes it too far, though. It's like literally like you're invested in a character for 2 episodes, and then they die at the end of the second episode. And it's like, why did I get
Yeah. Yeah.
But they are very good at that. Yeah.
I don't know how many seasons they're in. I keep waiting for Netflix to put more episodes in because I just can't invest financially into it, because I'm like, I know at some point the second I invest financially into a season, it's going to be awful.
Yeah.
Because so far it's been really good. And then there was another show that I can't quite think of. But if you want to see a really good sort of spy, well, Homeland is the other sort of big, nice one. Of course, Game of Thrones are kind of the current sort of bigger ones. But MI5 is one of those ones that the BBC has really allowed, again, the time to sort of breathe and have the stability to sort of do whatever they want.
Yeah.
And it helps.
What was interesting about Game of Thrones is that, speaking of the novelization of television, it is a novel.
Well, I remember
each season.
I remember us talking about that. You're like, oh yeah, all these books that I've got, like they're going to make a show of it. I'm like, how is that even going to work? Like there's like 18 books.
Yeah.
It's like, this is going to take forever to film.
Yeah. Well, it's a different series, actually. This series only has like 5 books.
That's right. I can't think
They're going into their 4th season.
Yeah.
And the book series, at a certain point, they're just going to have to cut ties with the book series, and it's going to be its own thing.
Yeah,
because the first 3 seasons, as far as I can tell, follow the books reasonably closely with some, minor changes. But the 4th and 5th books are done simultaneously. We just see different characters' perspectives. So they're going to have to figure out a way to do that. But it's a fascinating idea, because these sort of fantasy novels are so deep and have so many characters in them and tell such a broad story across a whole continent. You cannot possibly do this properly in a film. It almost makes me wonder if Lord of the Rings had been made 10 years later, would they have gone the television route? And I think the answer is yes. I think that's what Peter Jackson is trying to do now with The Hobbit. He's making basically 9 hours worth of film out of one 200-page book, and it's like, just make a TV show, dude.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, another one I was thinking of, so was it Fire and Ice? Maybe that's what the heck was that other book series?
No, the Song of Ice and Fire is the technical the name of the Game of Thrones series, but
maybe that's
everyone just calls it Game of Thrones because that was the name of it. The other one I talk about is Wheel of Time, which does have like 15 books. That's been years. The interesting thing about Game of Thrones is the book series is not finished yet.
Yeah, right.
And it might never be finished because the author of the books, who's now working on the TV show, probably doesn't have time to write the books anymore.
I think that's what I feel like I read that somewhere. He was just like, I'm just going to probably do the TV show.
Yeah.
And the books can come later if the TV show goes away, because obviously the books can be written if the TV show goes away. Another sort of set in olden times, if I use it as a term, show that's pretty decent is The Tudors.
Okay.
I've maybe have mentioned that before. Showtime, I believe, was on that one. Jonathan Rhys-Meyers is sort of the lead on that. He plays Henry V. Is that right?
Henry V.
Yeah. And it's really good. It's really worth seeing, and it does sort of stop at a good point in the show where you're sort of like, okay, my wife wishes there was more of it, but I'm just like, it ended right when it needed to, because it just started kind of making up stuff.
Yeah,
and it was like, you shouldn't do that. There's some pretty good historical documentation of what happened during this time.
Yeah, well, and that's another thing that's interesting about television versus film. Films have a set end point. Sure. We end the film. Television shows, they could go on forever.
Yeah,
and a lot of, I think, it's almost rare that a creator of a television show has the opportunity to be like, let's end it. Breaking Bad is going to be a fascinating example, because a lot of times the creators will say, all right, I'm ending the show here. And then the network will be like, yeah, let's do another one. And they'll convince Supernatural was one that was supposed to end after 5 seasons. It's in like, 8, 9 now? And it's like, you can sort of stretch it out forever. And a lot of times the creator,
same way, I thought, too.
The X-Files as well. David Duchovny was like, "I'm out," and you think, "All right, they got to end now." They're like, "Nah, let's keep going."
But we got the T-1000 or whatever.
A lot of times the creator doesn't own the show, so they're just a hired gun with this thing that they created, but they can leave, and the network can say, "Let's do another one."
Matthew Weiner was the same way, right? Up until recent, like he was kind of like, "I'm done," and then they were like, "Okay, well, we'll keep making the show," and then he was like, "Okay, I'll come back."
Is that because
I feel like that was the case?
They were kind of playing hardball with the final season because Mad Men has always gone over budget, is my understanding. I think they were just kind of. I think it was just sort of a bit of jousting over that final season. But you're right; it came very close to actually not happening.
Yeah.
From my
Sopranos is interesting as well because that's a 5-season television show over like 8 years or something. Like they would skip
stretching it out,
full years with no Sopranos because they weren't ready to do the season yet.
I felt bad for the actors because it was obviously like you got to find something else to do there, and then. It's almost like it's almost the same as making a movie. Like you shot a movie 2 years ago, now you got to come back and talk about it. It's like, of course, your life is completely different. 2 years has passed. Yeah. And The Sopranos was the exact same way. Obviously different to us. I mean, AMC does that now. Like, Walking Dead. It's like, here's your first 6 episodes. Screw you. Like, wait 6 months. You know,
Well, and I think what they're trying to do is television is now an event. It's like a film comes out and it's out for 6 weeks and then it's gone. Television, you have 6 weeks and then you gotta ramp it up so people watch all 6 weeks, and you gotta ramp them up so they'll watch the next 6 weeks the next time it comes out. This is why what Netflix is doing is so interesting.
Yeah, right.
They're just dropping them all on you. Yeah. Like you said, House of Cards is all going to come out all at once, and I was like, they're crazy. They're crazy, but maybe it's the right idea. The new Arrested Development season, which is
may not have
fascinating.
been as successful as House of Cards, but for that audience was great.
Dropping them all at once was absolutely essential. If you watch the first 3 episodes of Arrested Development, you would hate it. Yeah. Absolutely hate it. You have to watch the whole season. You might have to watch it twice before you can even partially enjoy it, which is really gutsy. Yeah. It might not have been a great idea, but I loved it about halfway through the second watch. And but it's tough.
In Netflix, I mean, there are now certain networks that have approached Netflix to be like, okay, we had this show. Can we toss it to you? We'll still pay for it, but we want to put it on your quote-unquote network just because they don't have the time and place for it. I've been reading a couple articles about that. No big examples so far. Yeah. But it's kind of interesting. It's like, well, we know you have the model. Yeah. You are the go-to. It's like rather than them trying to like, oh, we got our own little thing over here now. Why don't you come watch it? And it's like I think people are to the point now where they're used to their Netflix, they're used to their Hulus, and what's the
Amazon
other?
Amazon
is kind of the other one. So it's kind of like, and even Amazon was like, we have these 5 pilots. Watch them and tell us which ones you want. And it's like that's unheard of.
A lot of those are pretty good. One of them has John Goodman in it.
Right.
I mean, you got John Goodman in your show on a streaming service? That's insane. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens with this over the next 10 years. I mean, I think the broadcast model is basically dead. I mean, they'll keep beating that horse until there's no money left in it. They'll keep tweaking the rating system to get make it look like people are watching a lot of shows. But I cut cable 2 years ago.
You did, yeah.
I have not missed it. The only thing I miss even slightly is sports.
Yeah.
That's it. And I've kind of learned to deal without sports.
Well, we still watch the Super Bowl at your house.
Yeah.
You figured it out.
Yeah. I still get the basic – I get the broadcast networks, but I don't have a DVR. I don't have anything else.
Which is insane because it's like you were the one that introduced me to a TiVo.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, am I the only one with a TiVo now?
Go on, my son.
It was very, very crazy. I'm still very attached to cable television just for various reasons, and obviously my TiVo. But yeah, it is interesting to, and I'm sure there are like at least 10, 15 other shows that we haven't mentioned I'm sure I watch that you're just rambling them off in your head. And we did sort of have a list, and I think we hit most of them. But yeah, it is kind of interesting, sort of the evolution of where TV has gone based on, like you said, ratings, the economy. I think in technology, I think are sort of the big heavy hitters because people are able to move around, shift around. And I think the big example of that, I mean, like, is Clooney. I think Clooney going from, like, nobody TV star
He was Batman.
Yeah, he became
when Batman was a thing.
Yeah, I mean, and then like, but can George Clooney ever come back to television? Has he surpassed?
I couldn't see him as fronting a TV show now.
Yeah.
I really couldn't. Even though Kevin Spacey fronts House of Cards.
Sure. I maybe could see Clooney doing something like that, but it's like it is kind of interesting. Sort of like that's. I mean, I grew up on ER. Like shows like that, and then now it's like, oh, it's interesting to see where all these people like Noah Wyle is still doing television.
Yeah.
You know? And a weirdly weird, awful, not so awful sci-fi show that I keep watching for some reason. Yeah. And I don't know why.
Oh,
Fallen Skies or whatever.
Skies, yeah.
And I was delighted to see Linda Cardellini, who was on Freaks and Geeks and ER briefly, has now been on Mad Men this season.
Yeah.
And she's really good too.
Yeah.
Which is entertaining because I just started watching, and this has nothing to do with movies or TV or anything really, but what's the Children's Hospital?
Yeah.
Sort of, is it Megan Mullally kind of makes fun of?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The character on crutches on ER.
Yeah. I saw that. I was like, where do I know? Oh, it's ER. That's really kind of funny.
What's really funny about Children's Hospital is that the most recent seasons they've shot in the same hospital that Scrubs shot in. It's just been a hospital set. Yeah. So they bought that building, and now now it looks like exactly like Scrubs. Exactly like all the same locations, like same nurses station, same ER, same everything. It looks exactly like Scrubs.
Well, let's talk about Kickstarter for a second too, because obviously Veronica Mars is now going to be a movie.
Yes.
Like that started today, if I'm not mistaken. Like they
started shooting today.
There is a shot of like, this is the first day of shooting the Veronica Mars movie. Let's say something like Deadwood doesn't do so good, and there's a Kickstarter campaign to bring Deadwood back. Like, can something like that happen these days?
Well, I mean, it all depends on who owns what and who's willing to do what for what. Like, I don't know how they got Veronica Mars. I think what happened with Veronica Mars was the creator of the show went to the studio that owns the rights to it and said, I want to do this. Can I ask the fans for a budget? And if they give it to me, can we do it? And I think they were like, okay.
Yeah, they're not paying for it.
But I don't know that Rob Thomas actually physically owns the rights to Veronica Mars. Yeah. Deadwood is a weird case. I don't know.
I just use that as an example. I mean,
yeah.
Let's say a show comes out like now and it like Hannibal, and it's like I want it bad enough that I'll give them $100 or something.
Let's go back to my favorite example, Michael Uslan.
Wow, I'm like, I sound like really rich there, right?
Yeah.
Like $100, jeez.
But like Michael Uslan owned the rights to Batman for 10 years. Nobody wanted to make a Batman movie. You know, if he was smart enough to get that then and then still have it at a point in time when Kickstarter exists, that movie's getting made because he owns the rights to Batman. I think it can happen if the creator owns the rights. If they have the legal right to do it, if they have permission to do it, if they have some kind of revenue-sharing deal.
Do you see the networks going that way, though, regardless of who owns the rights?
I think the networks love it because the fans pay for stuff up front.
Right.
I mean, who doesn't love that? They'll pay you for it before it exists. Like we don't have any risk. That's great. I don't know if they are smart enough to go that route.
Let's just say HBO cancels Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
And the fans pay for it.
I could see that happening.
Okay. I don't know why they would, obviously, but
yeah. But what about when Rome was canceled?
Sure.
What if
I would pay for another season of Rome?
Yeah. I did see a funny comment on Twitter that somebody retweeted that was like, "Oh, so Kickstarter's how we keep people from. It was how we get people to pay for our stuff before they steal it."
Sure. Yeah.
Which, that's kind of true. Yeah, that kind of makes a lot of sense. But Kickstarter's interesting for television because making one episode of television is still pretty expensive if you're going to be on that level. I mean, you watch stuff like House of Cards and the Arrested Development on Netflix. As somebody who does a little bit of visual effects, I can see the strings a lot of times where they're saving money, and not doing a great job with the green screen effects. There's a couple of really atrocious ones when we're in the Oval Office looking out and they've green screened it and done a very bad job of putting some kind of background in there that doesn't look at all real. So they're saving some money here and there.
But a very cinematic looking show regardless.
Oh, yes.
I mean, there's a lot of
when
different
they're on
places.
Their sets, they look great. When they try to fake their sets, it doesn't look that good. Arrested Development had a lot of really bad green screen because so many of the actors are so famous now they don't have time to come in with all the same time as all the other actors. So they had to sort of shoot around people, and there was a couple of really bad moments where they green screened in a character that looked totally out of place, especially Henry Winkler. I don't know what happened with him. I don't know why he was so busy that he couldn't come in and do other stuff. I don't know what he's got going on, but
maybe he was the only one actually there.
Maybe so. Maybe
just
so.
Did everybody else.
Maybe so. But he was green screened in like every single episode, and it was really distracting. But yeah, that's where they're saving their money in a lot of cases. And maybe Kevin Spacey's like, look, this sounds like fun. David Fincher's involved. I don't know who's getting paid what.
Right.
Union rules are very specific about how much you get paid based on where it's going to air. If it's a cable show, you get this rate versus are there rates for actors doing original streaming stuff? I don't know.
I mean, I would imagine that the built-in cost for Netflix is already there.
Yeah.
So it's like maybe they just base it off of the current number of subscribers that exist.
Yeah.
And then based on maybe the stipulation that does that increase after a certain point.
Yeah.
I mean, they have obviously ways of tracking that. I mean, they know that I watched the entire thing in like 4 days.
Exactly.
So.
And they even put out something like after one thing came out, they were like, they had a stat of like how many people signed up for the free trial, watched all of this, and then canceled it. And it was like, a low number. Yeah. It was like 100,000 people out of their 25 million subscribers did that. And it's like, okay. I mean, that's the way they have to track that sort of thing. So who knows?
Now, is binge watching television, is it harmful to shows in the long run?
I don't know. I mean, it's harmful if a show doesn't get a second season because everyone waited until it was done and the network didn't have a way to track until DVD sales were out and the show was already canceled. And they're like, oh, wow, everyone bought the DVD set. Oh, 1 trillion people just watched this on Netflix. Wow, maybe there was some interest in this thing. But that's the network's problem right now, right? They can't accurately track who's watching what. Or
they still use archaic methods of the Nielsen ratings.
I think they can actually track it, and they know exactly how many people are watching what. They just don't want to tell anybody because it's way lower than they want us to believe.
They have a built-in presence with Twitter. I mean, that's you can sit there. I mean, I know for a fact that executives at NBC were tracking how Hannibal was doing on the social media side of things. The creator of the show was like, you need to tweet this because the fate of the show exists on this week, because there are executives that I just got done talking to that were like, well, we'll check the social media and see how that's doing. And then, of course, within, I think, a week and a half, the show got renewed. So it's like, and so that's a built-in one. But like you said, I know they have others. And, of course, then they send out the Nielsen, Arbitron, TV, radio stuff. And it's like, oh, so you're going to give me $5 when you could easily do this via Twitter? Like, why are you still investing in this?
Yeah, it's a little different ballgame now. I mean, the Nielsen ratings before, again, it was sort of like, oh, here's your top 10 shows, and then here's shows. I mean, and like Cheers and MASH, I think they were bottom before they, but they were renewed anyway. But now it's kind of like, it seems now the model's almost like niche shows. Yeah. And I know HBO plays a lot of that because HBO bases their stuff not so much on ratings but on subscribers.
Yeah.
So that's why Boardwalk Empire, after the very first episode Scorsese directed, it was automatically renewed for a second season because of the number of subscribers that they got from that one episode. So I think as long as you kind of please your audience. Yeah. Even like comedy shows like Community, which amazingly is now still back for a fifth season. They're bringing back Dan Harmon, which totally blows my mind.
Yeah.
So it just seems like a different model now than it used to be.
Yeah, and it'll be very interesting to see where that all goes in the next 10 years because I couldn't have predicted where we are now 10 years ago. So it's kind of fascinating. Yeah. But, we should get out of here. I imagine we'll be doing this sort of episode again in the future. Not too often, I don't think. This is a place for film, not a place for TV. But maybe every year we can come back and update everyone on our favorite shows. We can do one a year about television, especially during the summer when we don't have anything else to talk about at the cinema. But we'll get out of here. Craig, thanks so much for joining us. Thank you for joining us every time.
Sure.
We'll get out of here. Thank you guys for listening. My name is Andy.
And I'm Jason.
This has been and always will be a place for film. A Place for Film is recorded at WFIU Studios in Bloomington, Indiana.